Tracy, sailing the accelerated breeze north of Molokai and west of Elio. Straight in from Elio to 3/4 of a mile off Cocoa Head works for slow boats with deep VMG angles in windy years where the wind is from the northeast. And the no-jibe straight-in approach can be welcome in those boats in those years. You've got a jibe just past Elio in lighter years where the wind is out of the east, especially on fast boats where your ankles are hotter. And if it's really windy, jibing off Elio can be more fun than you want. And if that's the case, then you can delay the jibe. But typically, if your crew's up to it, it really pays to be able to jibe off Elio and sail in that accelerated breeze. You want to avoid the area near Makapu because it's light. So if you're coming in too high on Cocoa Head, jibe in mid-channel, but don't carry it right on over. Going close to Cocoa Head is okay. It's a convergent breeze. You get these heading puffs after Cocoa Head. If it's a northeast wind, it's a windy northeast wind, you get those puffs. You don't get them if it's an easterly wind. And those heading northeasterly puffs can be character building. And then in light years, you often have to do a few jibes along Oahu to stay out of the bays. And then navigate to the buoy, especially at night. There'll be lots of flashing red lights. And boats have gotten in trouble in there, so you just want to navigate to the buoy. And don't expect to be able to identify the buoy more than about a half mile away. I'm going to go straight to the next chart. Okay, this is a chart with ISO tax. Fairly hard to come by a chart. But you can see why the approach that we're talking about works. Does you see where it says max off of Kalapapa and then it says max off of Elio? So in a typical year, what you want to do is you want to sail through both maxes. You come into Kalapapa and you do your jibe so you can sail through that accelerated breeze. And then if you're in a slow boat and it's a northeasterly windy year, you're good to go and you sail right through that second max. That's one and in. But if you're in Comanche, you're sailing much hotter angles, so you have to do a couple of jibes along Molokai and then you jibe off Elio to sail through that max that's just off Elio. And then you try to do one and in from there, but you almost always get lifted and then you got to do a couple more jibes along the island. But the goal is to sail through both maxes, the one off Kalapapa and the one off Elio, and the goal is to try to get one and in from Elio, because there's more wind on your port jibe below Elio than you'll ever see again for the rest of the approach. So any port jibe you do off Elio is going to be way faster than doing port jibes in the vicinity of Oahu. Those are my comments. So now's a great time for questions.
What's the frequency of the different downloads of grips on the different services?
So GFS and FP3, it's every 6 hours.
Is that on midnight, 6?
Okay, you want to think it through. The synoptic times, when by treaty all of the weather services around the world take all their measurements, are 0, 6, 12, and 18 Zulu. And then it takes the US government about 5 hours to do the initialization and then the computation of the runs. So then the FP3 and the GFS come out 5 hours after those times UTC. So that would be 5, 11, etc., 17. And that's Zulu time. And as a navigator, you mostly get your head around the Zulu times. And then the HRRR, its update times kind of fluctuate. It happens every hour. The last time I looked, it was like 35 minutes after the hour. But the way to do it is if you order one by SailDocs and you take a very careful look at the header, you can tell when the file was prepared. And so then the next time you update it 10 minutes after that, so that you get the new one. And you can do the same thing on the GFS. Typically you'll find on SailDocs that they come out 4 hours and 45 minutes later, but I generally pick 5 or 5.5 hours just to be safe.
Is each one of those 6-hour updates live, or are some of those modeled forward from the last flight?
Both. The 0 and the 12 are run with mostly new data, where all of the balloons get launched and all the data gets taken. The 6 and the 18, they take the previous run and then they update it with additional data, but it's not entirely new data. And then if you take, I prefer the 0 and the 12. But you will find other weather guys who say, oh no, that's wrong, the 6 and the 18 are better. So there's no real consensus. But if you're double-handed or single-handed, I just get the 0 and the 12, because you can't spend all the time doing this stuff. But on a fully crewed boat, you get them all. And on a fully crewed boat, we'll have to ask Joe whether they've used FV3 to replace GFS. But if they haven't, then I would download both if you have Inmarsat, and then I would run them both as an ensemble, so you can see both. But my experience has been the FV3 is better, but it'd be worth looking at the GFS also, just to see if there's any big difference. But I don't think in the Transpac area, I don't think you'd likely see a difference. And there's also a reasonable chance that GFS will be gone and the FV3 will be relabeled GFS by the time of the race, but I don't know. Yes?
So for doing optimal routing for that expedition, do you keep one waypoint at the end, or you keep changing the waypoints and thinking, you know what, I'm going to go a little bit more south and figure out how that goes?
That's a really good question. So let me use as an example of Transatlantic.
What was the question?
The question was, where do you set your destination waypoint in expedition? And it's a really insightful question, and the answer is really interesting. So let's imagine a difficult situation of you're doing a transatlantic race in a boat where it's probably going to take you 15 days to cross the Atlantic. Well, conveniently, the GFS runs for 15 days. So it's tempting to put your finish point in, at the Lizard, and then just run around. And it's nice, you have weather data for the whole route. And that's almost always the wrong answer, and it's really wrong. And the reason it's wrong is that the GFS goes off the rails after about 7 days. And once it's gone off the rails for that second 7 days, it may well be forecasting some major feature that has a very little likelihood of actually happening. But the routing algorithm in Expedition, it has no common sense. It assumes that the weather is just as dependable on the 15th day as it is tomorrow. And so Expedition will do something that you really don't want to do, which is to sail extra miles today in order to deal with some major weather system in 13 days into the future. And that's a really big mistake. So what you do instead, and this is common for Volvo navigators, is before the race, you take historical weather. I typically use 11 years of historical weather, and I'll run 121 routes, and I'll pick the 5 days before, the calendar day, and the 5 days after the start time of a race for the previous 11 years. So that gives me 121 routes. And I'll run all of those routes, and I'll plot them all on the same chart. And then that will give you a graphic highway of, okay, I get it. Most of the successful tracks that have started in the vicinity of this calendar date over the last 11 years go along this path. So then what you do is when you're doing the race, you pick a destination point, an aiming point that's 5-6 days in the future, it's along the highway. And then every time you run a new route, you move it forward. And so your highway point, moves forward, so it always stays 6 days in the future. And that way, you're guaranteeing yourself that you're routing towards a pretty safe, climatological, sensible place to be. And you're not letting Expedition sail extra miles today for some major weather feature that is forecast to happen in 13 days, but has a 0% chance of, not zero, but it has a low probability of actually happening. And the interesting thing to me is, I've had the opportunity to navigate for business guys. has like, Steve Fawcett and Richard Branson and Larry Ellison and Jim Clark and Roy Disney. And when I explain what I'm doing to them, they get it instantly. Because what we all do is our currency is extra mile sail. We all know the shortest distance to Hawaii is the Great Circle. That's easy. But we sail more miles. And why do we sail more miles? Because we have an expected return of more than those miles. So we sail an extra mile to go to the south because we're expecting to get more than that mile back. But we're making that investment based on information that's pretty darn good for the next few days, and it's decreasingly good, into the future. And so then you write about that point of the explanation, one of these business guys will say, oh shit, that's what I do every day, is make business decisions based on information that's decreasingly good with time. But yet you have to decide what to do. So it's an interesting insight. But so if you're in California or something, you almost never want to run your route all the way to Honolulu. What you want to do is to run your route for a point that's 5-6 days in the future. It's kind of in the center of where most of the Cal 40 tracks go. And you can either find that through the historical tracks, or if you have access to the historical weather data, you can compute it yourself by running your boat 121 times or any number of times in history. And I've done this exercise for Comanche when we had to pick a departure time for the transatlantic. I navigated Comanche in the transatlantic 8,000 routes. And it was basically every 6 hours for the last, I think it was 11 years. And I just did it during, the sort of May to November period. I didn't do the midwinter ones. But I basically computed 8,000 routes. And then I filtered out the routes that took 24 hours off the record to see what was going on. And then we knew exactly what we were looking for a pattern. And then we found one, and it worked, and we took a day off the record. So expedition is a really interesting tool that gives you the ability to do these things. But your question is a really insightful one, that you're almost always letting expedition do something that makes no sense if you ask it to route for more than 6 days. Because it assumes that the weather's just as dependable 12 days out as it is tomorrow, and that's of course crazy. Good question. Yes?
Is there a way of syncing up the previous data from previous weather data from previous Transpac races and juxtaposing the boats that sailed the race and so forth? And is there value to that?
Yeah, there is. It's a lot of work, but that's what that's why I've got grid files since 2004.
So you've kept those. Are those currently available locally or no?
If you're willing to do a lot of work, you can get them from NOAA, but it is a fair amount of work. But there's no easy way to get that data.
And does Yellow Brick keep track of the most recent Transpac races, and can you review those?
They go missing from Yellow Brick after a while. So it's good whenever you navigate a Transpac to squirrel that data away. So I also, am careful to store that. In the old races, of course, it's stored as, printouts, back at the standings and whatnot. But in more recent races, you can do a Yellow Brick complete historical download. Do it after the finish of the last boat, and then you can get a sort of reasonably concise file that has every boat's Yellow Brick positions for the whole race.
So regarding your answer about expedition planning 6 days out, what's the data source for the routes for those boats for the past 11 years?
Well, I compute them. So basically what I'll do is take the boat's polars that I'm navigating, and then I'll run 121 routes through start times of 11 days in each of those 11 years. And the 11 and 11, those are just numbers that I pick out of habit. But and then I'll take that data set. And so I'm currently doing that for Comanche. We're trying to decide whether to carry dagger boards. So I've got 2 sets of polars, and I'm running them each through 121 races to see whether it pays. So, and then we'll go without boards no matter what the result is. Yes?
Eight-time, nine-time?
I don't know. I don't think the breeze acceleration of Molokai is caused by thermal. I think it's just caused by physical ducting. It is a divergent shoreline, so you wouldn't necessarily expect the acceleration, but it's this unique shoreline of these vertical cliffs. At night, it sure seems windier in there. But it mostly pays to go in there. And then if it doesn't pay, then you'll know on the way in and you can just jive out. But occasionally, that approach doesn't work and it's light along Molokai, and then you just jive out. It's easy. But it's a good place to go, just in case it does work. And if it does work, you get that accelerated breeze and you can just crush boats on the outside. Because you're sailing lower and a straighter course and more breeze and faster.
Do you use current or sea temperature data to help verify anything that's on the wind speeds or highs and lows and all that?
I haven't found current data to be that helpful for a Transpac. Occasionally I'll look at it for the Catalina channel, but for reasons that I've never been able to figure out, the models don't seem to do that good a job of predicting that adverse current in the center of the Catalina channel. And then the rest of the race, you do see currents and you measure them, but none of the models seem to predict them accurately enough. So I've just sort of learned to kind of ignore them. I do the same thing in the Bermuda race once you're well south of the stream. But the models show all kinds of interesting currents. But it seems like you never want to pay anything to play them well south, whereas in the stream itself and north of the stream, you can take it to the bank. They're absolutely accurate. But yeah, the Transpac, I've never found that it makes sense to pay an extra mile to optimize for current. Yes?
Likely El Nino year, light moderate, have you seen anything in your 120 route, seen El Nino going back?
It's a common question. The El Nino year, the water's warmer. On average, the trades are a little bit less, and the squalls are a little bit more. In the La Nina years, on average, the squalls are less, and the trades are a little more. But then the variation from week to week, I think, is greater than the sort of average variation from El Nino to La Nina. But nevertheless, everybody wants to talk about it. So I generally, when I brief the crew, I look it up and tell them where we are and tell them that it's going to be windier squalls or lighter squalls. But you go back through the data, and it seems like you can have windy trades in an El Nino year and vice versa. It's just so the luck of the draw on the high seems to swamp it out for a race. Yes?
There was an article written about blob, which was the heating of the water in the equatorial region, between, let's say, Hawaii and the equator. It's pretty much gone. They're basically saying because of that, that is going to start cooling back up to where it's going to be. Would that have any effect on how basically the trough's coming from the south? Is that going to have any effect, or do you have any comment on that?
Yeah, I haven't looked into that, so I'm not sure. But if the equator was cooling down, that might cause reduced trades. The El Nino, the La Nina, where it has sort of the waters where we race cooling down, that gives us increased trades. So I think it's all depending on where the cooler water is. But it's hard to race a Transpac based on those kind of seasonal changes, because you're kind of better off to take the hand of cards you're dealt and race in that. But it's impossible not to speculate about that stuff. It's like your crew asks you, "What's the weather look like a week in advance?" What do you say?
Good.
Any other questions? Just a couple of comments on preparation. What I try to do is to move on board the boat 5 days before the race and do all my preparation from the boat. And then most of the time you use your Wi-Fi or your cellular, but from time to time get all your data through satellite. So you're doing your preparation from the boat just exactly the way you'll come up with your daily workload as a navigator or your 6 hourly workload as a navigator, but you go through all the same processes and you kind of get to move in. So I try to move into about 5 or 6 days before a Hobart or a Transpac or something like that. And I find that's very helpful. For the Transpac, be really careful about some of the rules that are different than a lot of the rules we race in. But 41, outside assistance, be sure you don't inadvertently use paid data. Outriggers, a lot of controversy about that from previous years, whether they're legal or not. So just make sure that you get the organizing authority to be real clear on those kinds of issues and what's legal and what's not. Okay, thank you very much.